Hey everybody, Mark Engman, Blue Spruce Solutions. So the next thing I wanted to explore is spices. You may have heard that some spices, particularly things like turmeric, chili powder, sometimes cinnamon, can be contaminated with lead. So what I did was I grabbed a bunch of spices off my spice shelf and I'm going to test them all with my XRF. Now, I also wanted to go online and just randomly buy from Amazon a bunch of different types of turmeric. So we're going to test those and we're going to see what happens. Before getting into results, let's take a quick look at how lead gets into spices. Heavy metals, including lead, enter spices through the soil and through water absorption during growth. There might be some lead naturally in the soil, but obviously it's a lot worse when there's air and water pollution. Those can come from industries. They can also come from things like local lead recyclers. For example, this picture shows a small-scale lead recycler melting lead over an open fire. That causes a ton of local pollution. Sometimes spices can get contaminated during processing. The machinery is not clean or has lead in it. Sometimes it's the packaging. Unfortunately, in some cases, lead is purposely added to spices to enhance their color and weight. For example, this picture from an NPR story has one piece of turmeric polished with lead chromate. That gets ground up and ends up in the powdered turmeric. It makes it look brighter and it makes it a little heavier, but obviously at that point it's contaminated with lead. So, looking at results, I am happy and relieved to report that all my own spices had no detectable levels of lead on my XRF. Also, happily, the turmeric packages I bought randomly off Amazon had no detectable lead except for one. This Horizon turmeric tested at 1.5 parts per million lead. Now, that is a pretty low level. 1.5 million parts per million lead is the maximum allowed for spices in the European Union, and it's also the maximum amount recommended in the American Spice Trade Association's guidance for U.S. industries. So, if I'm using this particular turmeric, do I need to worry? Is it dangerous? Well, what standard do we use? So the FDA recommends a maximum of 2.2 micrograms per day of lead for children and 8.8 micrograms per day for females of childbearing age. So let's use those limits for our discussion. 1 part per million means 1/1,000,000th of a gram of lead, or 1 microgram, per each gram of turmeric. A teaspoon of turmeric weighs about 2.5 grams. Okay, so for this particular brand of turmeric, 1.5 part per million, a teaspoon is going to contain about 3.75 micrograms of lead. Okay, that's not much. So if you use a teaspoon in a big pot of some yummy Indian food that serves 4, 5, 6 people, then your lead intake is going to be minimal. However, some families give their kids golden milk, which is basically turmeric heated up in milk with some other spices and sweeteners. You might use a teaspoon of turmeric in 12 ounces of milk. So if that's the case, the child drinks 12 ounces of golden milk, that's 3.75 micrograms of lead, way over the recommended daily limit. So, after all this testing, where does that leave us? Well, here are my takeaways. First, I'm pretty comfortable buying spices from any of our major grocery store chains here in the U.S. Thanks to Consumer Reports and some other organizations, there's been a lot of attention in the past few years on lead and other contaminants in food, and the spice industry has taken that seriously. So you have to be vigilant and you have to be careful. But again, by and large, I'm comfortable buying spices from the major grocery stores. I'm less comfortable buying spices in bulk off Amazon or anywhere else. Again, most of these tested negative. One of them was a little positive, and even that little tiny 1.5 parts per million can add up over time and cause lead exposure. So I'd urge you to keep up with organizations like consumerreports.org, or you can check out the New York State recall website. They're very strict on spices there. And also just to say that organizations around the world like Pure Earth or like the Lead Exposure Elimination Project are working to prevent spices from being contaminated in the first place, either through pollution or through the addition of lead chromate. So if you want to learn more about that, please check out their websites. Thanks for listening, and I got a ton of turmeric now that's been lead tested, so if you need some turmeric, hit me up.